Hello, dear listeners. I'm your host, Genevieve Hopkins, and welcome to episode 5 of the Wheel and Cross podcast. In the Southern Hemisphere, winter solstice approaches at the end of the week. Many people decorate their homes with vibrant evergreens and organise festive feasts centred around the winter solstice. For others, including me, the winter solstice is a time for peace and reflection in the lead up to the main winter celebration of Yule in the middle of July. Decking the halls for Yule begins in my household on the 1st of July and has the same decorative features as the winter solstice, but with more gnomes and Scandi Germanic themes. In this episode, we will explore the custom of decking the halls, as well as the meanings and symbolism of the season's favourite evergreen plants. We'll also dive into the history and tradition of wassailing, its evolution into caroling, and the fascinating but creepy tradition of the Welsh Mari Lwyd. This podcast is free, but if you like my work and would like to support me so that I can continue doing it, please consider a paid subscription. If that is not possible, and you enjoy this podcast, I would really appreciate your reviews on any of the podcasting platforms you use. Feel free to share this podcast and leave comments on the podcast page. Welcome to episode 5 of the Wheel and Cross podcast. Deck the halls and strike the chorus. As always, I would like to acknowledge the custodians of these lands on which I work and live in Australia's capital region, the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and I pay my deep respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to all First Nations across Australia. The tradition of decking or decorating the inside of homes with evergreen plants for Christmas or Yule is a common custom across Europe with deep historical roots, as we explored in previous episodes. Although Puritan Christmas bans dampened the display of Christmas festivities in Britain and its colonies, the rest of Europe maintained the tradition. It was revived in Britain and then America during the Victorian era, and is now an integral part of Christmas festivities across Europe and former European colonies. A carol describing the joy and merriment of this tradition, called Deck the Halls, was penned in 1861 by Scottish musician Thomas Oliphant, who used a Welsh folk tune traditionally sung for New Year's Eve, Nos Galan. Deck the Halls is one of my favourite songs for the season. It reflects the fun and joy of winter festivities without mentioning any religious themes, Santa Claus or gift-giving, which are not part of my celebrations. I especially love Nat King Cole's version, released in 1960. Several species of evergreen plants were traditionally used to deck the halls, and held great importance and symbolism for ancient Roman, Celtic, Germanic and Norse peoples. These plants included the conifers, holly, ivy and mistletoe. Conifers were significant plant species for the Celts, Germanic and Scandinavian peoples. The Celts considered the pine tree, especially the Scots pine, a sacred tree with powerful symbolism. It was believed to be a source of wisdom, protection and vitality. During the winter solstice, the Celts decorated their homes and sacred spaces with pine branches and pine cones. The pine's evergreen nature represented eternal life, and it was revered for its ability to survive through harsh winters and for its durability. The website, irelandcalling.com, had some interesting information about Scots pine. Scots pine bonfires were lit to encourage the sun to come back and fertilise the land for the coming crops, and pine glades were decorated in shiny trinkets to symbolise divine light and eternal life. Pine nuts would have been a vital source of food in midwinter when supplies were scarce, and were also thought to increase fertility. For Germanic peoples, particularly the Norse, conifer trees such as the Nordic spruce were important and symbolic during Yule celebrations. The Norse believed that these evergreen trees were favoured by the gods as they remained green and vibrant even during the cold winter months. As part of their Yule traditions, they would bring evergreen trees into their homes and decorate them with ornaments, candles, and small carved figures representing gods, spirits, and ancestors. This tradition persisted in Scandinavia as well as in Germany, although the symbolism of the tree and its decorations were eventually changed to reflect Christian beliefs. We will explore the history of the Yule and Christmas tree in a future episode. Pine cones were also important folkloric items during the winter season. The German tradition of silver pine cones, known as Silbersafen in German, is rooted in folklore and superstition. According to these legends, silver pine cones are believed to possess magical properties and bring good luck and prosperity to those who possess them. The tradition of displaying silver pine cones dates back to medieval times and is particularly associated with the Bavarian and Tyrolean regions of Germany. One popular story featuring the silver pine cones involves the Wolpertinger, a mythical creature said to inhabit the forests of Bavaria. The Wolpertinger is a fantastical creature with the body of a rabbit or hare, feathered wings, a pair of deer antlers sprouting from its head, and wolf fangs and claws. It is said that the Wolpertinger guards the precious silver pine cones, hiding them deep within the forest. Finding these rare pine cones in the forest is considered a stroke of luck, as they are believed to bring blessings and good fortune. In some versions of the story, it is said that the silver pine cones can only be found on a full moon night during the winter solstice. Those who are lucky enough to discover them are said to gain special powers or have their wishes granted. Another popular version of the story involves the King of Dwarves rather than the Wolpertinger. This version of the silver pine cones is read from the book Winter Tales, Stories from Around the World, written by Dawn Casey and illustrated by Zana Goldhawk. The silver fir tree, which grows in the frozen north of Europe, is the original Christmas tree, revered long before the Norway spruce became popular. At Christmas time in the Harz Mountains of Germany, it is a tradition to gather cones from fir and pine trees and paint them silver. Strings of silver pine cones swing from the mantelpiece, and silver cones hang from the Christmas tree, where they swirl and shine in the firelight. And if you ask the old grandfather sitting by the fire how this tradition began, he will tell you this story. In an evergreen forest in Germany, there once lived a mother, a father, and their 7 children. The father worked in the mountains, mining the silver that lay deep underground in the hidden hollows of the earth. One hard winter, the man fell ill. He lay in bed too sick to get up. He could not go into the forest to hunt, so the family had no meat. He could not go into the forest for wood, so the family had no fire. One day, the wife picked up her basket and walked up into the forested hills, I will gather some pine cones. Perhaps someone will buy a few at the market in town. If not, at least they will give us a bright fire." The woman hadn't gone far from her house when she came to a thin group of trees. In the amber light of the setting sun, the beech leaves glowed like embers. There were a few green spruce amid the brown beech and bare birch. The woman bent to pick up the few cones that lay on the ground. They were cold from the damp earth, small and hard and tight. As she did so, she felt the strangest sensation, as if someone was watching her. She turned, and there, low in the shadows of the mossy rocks, was a little old man with a long white beard. His face was weathered, and his eyes glinted like shards of crystal. "Those cones belong here," he said, "where their seeds can grow into trees." The frightened woman dropped the cones. "Go further on," said the little man. The woman clutched her shawl around her neck. The air was cold on her bare face. The sun was sinking, and the sky was changing from gold to grey. Black rooks wheeled and cawed overhead, flying home to roost. How the woman wished that she were going home to her familiar fireside, instead of up the hill into the dark. Far above, the woman could just make out the rocky top of the hill, cloaked in mist. Up ahead stood a forest of fir, thick and dark, silent and still. The woman felt hushed, as if she were walking into a church. Here the trees stood taller than houses. Their cones grew upward like candles. Their soft bristled branches brushed the sky. Their crowns whispered with the wind, singing the old songs. The upturned tips of their arms cupped the stars. Like hands, thought the woman, gazing upwards. Open hands. The ground beneath her feet was thick with the spines of fir, and everywhere, amidst the toadstools, lay long brown cones. She bent to pick up the cone at her feet. "Ow!" she cried out loud. A fir cone had hit her back. "Oh!" And another. A hail of cones pelted from the trees. "Bewitched! Bewitched! This place is bewitched!" she cried. The woman grabbed her basket and she ran. But the more she ran, the heavier the basket grew, until her arms were stretching in their sockets and the handle bit into her frozen fingers. At last she was home. With a shuddering sigh, she swung the heavy basket onto the table. Pine cones spilled from her basket and rolled across the scrubbed wooden table. Every one of them was pure silver. "What magic is this?" cried the woman, half afraid. "Fear not," said her husband, examining the pine cones. "I believe that you have met with Gubbitch, the king of the dwarves." The woman kept 7 of the silver pine cones, 1 for each of her 7 children. The children helped her to carry the rest of the cones to the market, and they returned laden with packets and parcels. That evening, the family sat down to bowls of rich steaming stew and bread hot from the oven. They held hands around their old wooden table, and they gave thanks. "Tomorrow you must go back to the forest and thank the king of the dwarves for his gift," said her husband. The next day, the woman offered her thanks to Gubbitch. The little man smiled, his eyes crinkling and twinkling in his brown face. "The forest is rich with gifts," he said. "Here, pick the leaves of this plant. Brew a tea for your husband." The woman looked doubtfully at the grey-brown seeds and deep-toothed leaves, dusty and ragged. But the little man kept watching her and nodded his head, so she began to pick. The leaves were soft, like faded velvet. "Perhaps he means to poison us," said the woman later that night, eyeing the green liquid as it bubbled in the pot. It didn't look like the tea she bought from the market. "Have faith," said her husband. "Gubbitch means us well." Every morning and every evening, the man drank the bitter brew. Day by day, colour returned to his pale face. Light returned to his dull eyes. Strength returned to his weak body. He was well again. From that day on, the family were healthy and wealthy. They kept the 7 silver pine cones on the dresser as a reminder of Gubbitch's kindness. When the children grew up and found homes of their own, they each kept a silver pine cone on their dresses. And their children passed the cones on, and so the story spread, and the fir tree was always remembered with great respect. So that even today, families far and wide gather pine cones and paint them silver and string them on the mantelpiece or hang them on the Christmas tree, where they swirl slow and shine in the firelight. Today, the tradition of displaying silver pine cones at Christmas or Yule continues to be celebrated in certain regions of Germany, where they are crafted and sold as decorative items for the Christmas markets. They are often made from real pine cones that are carefully coated with silver paint or glitter. Blown glass silver pine cone ornaments are also a popular Christmas tree decoration. Both Celtic and Germanic cultures incorporated holly into their festive traditions. It was commonly used as a decoration during winter celebrations. Holly branches were hung on doors and windows, bringing good fortune and warding off negativity. The vibrant red berries added a touch of colour and vitality to the otherwise barren winter landscape. For the ancient Celts, holly was associated with protection and vitality. Its evergreen nature made it a symbol of enduring life during the harsh winter months. The sharp, spiky leaves of holly were believed to repel evil spirits and safeguard against malevolent forces like witches, elves, and fairies. It was also associated with fertility and the renewal of life. Neo-pagan Celtic druids tell the story of the Holly King and the Oak King, who engage in a seasonal battle. When the Holly King, the King of Winter, wins his battle, summer is defeated. Summer comes again when the Oak King defeats the Holly King in turn. The origins of the story are not known, but are claimed to have been passed down from pre-Christian oral traditions and were present in medieval motifs. In German folklore, holly was regarded as a sacred plant and was associated with the god Thor. It was believed to have protective powers and was often used to ward off evil spirits and lightning strikes. Holly was also connected to the celebration of Yule, where it symbolised hope and the promise of new beginnings. Its bright red berries represented the life force within the winter landscape. With the advent of Christianity, holly took on additional meanings that aligned with the story of Jesus Christ. The prickly leaves of holly were said to represent the crown of thorns worn by Jesus during the crucifixion, and the red berries symbolised his blood. Holly became associated with Christ's sacrifice and the promise of salvation. Ivy is also a significant plant in the winter solstice traditions of the Celtic and Germanic peoples, symbolising resilience, protection, and everlasting life. In Celtic mythology, ivy was associated with the winter season and was often depicted as a companion to holly. It was believed that while holly represented the masculine aspect of winter, ivy embodied its feminine qualities. Together, they represented the balance of energies during the dark and cold months. The evergreen nature of ivy, with its ability to thrive even in harsh conditions, made it a powerful symbol of endurance and tenacity. It was seen as a guardian against negative forces and a source of protection for homes during the winter season. Celtic and Germanic people would adorn their dwellings with ivy wreaths, garlands, and other decorative elements, both inside and outside, as a way to invoke these protective qualities. As the traditions surrounding the winter solstice merged with Christian beliefs, ivy too became associated with the story of Jesus' birth, representing humility and clinging to faith. The pairing of holly and ivy is an old pre-Christian symbol of the winter season that has survived even in modern-day Christian mythology, though its symbolism has been modified to align with the Christian faith. The mixing of the old pre-Christian and new Christian symbolism for holly and ivy is particularly distinct in the Christmas carol, The Holly and the Ivy. Mistletoe is another evergreen plant that held great significance and was considered sacred by many ancient cultures. It is a parasitic plant that grows on various trees such as oak, apple, and hawthorn, and is characterized by its smooth, leathery leaves and small white berries. In Celtic and Druidic traditions, mistletoe was believed to possess healing and magical properties. It was seen as a symbol of fertility, vitality, and divine blessings. The white mistletoe berries were believed to represent the essence of the male reproductive force, or semen. This association was likely linked to the plant's ability to bear fruit even during the winter months, when other vegetation was dormant. It symbolized the potency and fertility of nature even in the midst of darkness and cold. Ancient Roman writer and naturalist Pliny the Elder recorded in the 1st century that Druids held rituals during the winter solstice, where they would gather mistletoe from oak trees using golden sickles. In Norse mythology, mistletoe played a role in the saga of Baldur, the god of light and joy. It was said that Baldur's mother, Frigg, made all things promise not to harm her son, except for mistletoe, which she overlooked. Loki, the mischievous god, crafted an arrow from mistletoe and used it to bring about Baldur's demise. Frigg's tears turned the mistletoe's berries white, and the mistletoe became a symbol of forgiveness, love, and the banishment of evil. The tradition of kissing under the mistletoe is thought by some to have originated from this story. Washington Irving wrote about the tradition of kissing under the mistletoe in the 19th century, though he did not know the origin of the tradition. It is hard to say exactly what is the origin of the English kissing under the mistletoe, but the practice would appear to be due to an imagined relation between the love of the sexes and the spirit of fertility embodied in the sacred bough, and it may be a vestige of the license often permitted at folk festivals. According to one form of the English custom, the young men plucked, each time they kissed a girl, a berry from the bough. When the berries were all picked, the privilege ceased. Throughout history, mistletoe has retained its association with winter solstice and Christmas celebrations. It is often hung in doorways or from ceilings, and it is customary for people to exchange kisses beneath the mistletoe. Mistletoe is also incorporated into holiday decorations, wreaths, and other festive arrangements, though not many people know the history or meaning behind the tradition. Australia has its own species of mistletoe that play a vital role in the biodiversity of various Australian ecosystems. These 92 species of mistletoe are an important food source for nectar-feeding birds and insects, as well as providing edible berries and leaves. Each mistletoe species also has its own unique cultural associations within different Australian First Nations communities. For many Australian First Nations peoples, mistletoe is considered a sacred plant with spiritual and medicinal properties. Some communities believe that mistletoe is a living link between the sky and the earth, symbolising the connection between the physical and spiritual realms. It is sometimes used as an ingredient in traditional medicines, and its branches and leaves may be used in rituals and for adorning ceremonial objects. Mistletoe is often associated with certain bird species, such as the mistletoe bird, which plays a crucial role in the plant's reproductive cycle. Some First Nations dreaming stories feature these birds and their relationship with mistletoe, illustrating the importance of these plants in the ecosystem. A word of caution for any readers in Australia. Please do not collect mistletoe without knowing exactly what you are doing, and ensure you have the proper environmental and cultural permissions. Some mistletoe species are rare or endangered, and some hold particular spiritual and cultural significance for Australia's First Nations peoples, requiring specific protocols for their collection. Now that we've explored the traditions and symbolism of decking the halls with evergreen plants, let's take a look at the history and tradition of wassailing and its evolution into carolling. Wassailing is an ancient tradition whose origins can be traced back to the pre-Christian practice of blessing orchard trees at the winter solstice, at Christmas or Yule Eve, or on Twelfth Night. The word wassail comes from the Old English and Anglo-Saxon toast, wes hal or wes hail, meaning be of good health, which was traditionally met with drink hail in reply. Farmers, farm workers and villagers would gather together and in a spirited and merry procession, likely well lubricated with cider, they would visit each orchard with a wooden wassail bowl filled with a warm, spiced alcoholic beverage, commonly apple cider, which was often topped with pureed apple called lamb's wool. Gathering around the largest and usually the oldest tree in each orchard, the year's wassail queen, or sometimes the youngest boy called the tom tit, placed a piece of wassail-soaked toast in the tree's branches. This tradition is probably related to the origin of the term toast, to cheer a drink. The offering of toast was a gift for the birds and animals, and an offering of the wassail, sprinkled around the apple tree roots, was a gift to the orchard and the tree spirits, a blessing for its health and a good harvest. It was usually accompanied by traditional wassail songs and much toasting from those gathering for the custom. The merrymakers then proceeded to the next orchard, making as much noise as possible with singing, shouting, banging of pots and pans, and even the firing of shotguns. This lively commotion served the dual purpose of awakening the dormant tree spirits and warding off any malevolent entities lurking among the branches. There are many versions of wassail songs and customs that are specific to certain regions. Here's one from the South Hams of Devon, recorded in 1871. Here's to thee, old apple tree, whence thou mayst bud, and whence thou mayst blow, and whence thou mayst bear apples enow. Hats full, caps full, bushel sacks full, and my pockets full too. Huzzah! This next song is the first stanza of a carol called the Gower Wassail, from Gower in Wales. It is still a popular carol and has been covered by many folk bands. I'm not going to sing it for you, but I will repeat the lyrics. A wassail throughout all the town. Our cup it is white, and our ale it is brown. Our wassail is made of the good ale and cake, some nutmeg and ginger, the best you can bake. Our wassail is made of the elderberry bough, and so, my good neighbours, we'll drink unto thou. Besides all on earth, you have apples in store. Pray let us come in, for it's cold by the door. This next wassail comes from Cornworthy in Devon, recorded in 1805. Huzzah, huzzah, in our good town, the bread shall be white and the liquor be brown. So here, my old fellow, I drink to thee, and the very health of each other tree. Well may ye bloom, well may ye bear, blossom and fruit, both apple and pear, so that every bough and every twig may bend with a burden both fair and big. May ye bear us and yield us fruit such as stores, that the bags in the chambers and house run o'er. The tradition of wassailing is still popular in England's apple and cider producing areas, such as Somerset, Devon and Kent, each with its own particular version of the tradition. An old folktale from Somerset, The Apple Tree Man, tells of a poor man who, on Christmas Eve, gave his last mug of mulled cider to the trees in his orchard. The Apple Tree Man, the spirit of the oldest apple tree in the orchard, rewarded the man by revealing the location of buried gold, which allowed him to buy the farm and its precious orchard. During the Middle Ages, wassailing expanded from rural orchards and country villages and became a customary practice throughout England. It acted as a form of charitable giving, distinct from begging, in which peasants would sing traditional songs, perform dances, and engage in merrymaking, and in return, feudal lords would display their beneficence by offering the wassailing peasants hospitality, food, drink, and sometimes money. Apart from encouraging goodwill and seasonal festivity, this tradition helped to cement the hierarchical feudal social order. However, as Neil Edworthy records in his book, The Curious World of Christmas 2008, by the 1500s, wassailing often took the form of bands of drunk peasants staggering between the houses of richer folk, singing carols and refusing to leave until they had been rewarded for their efforts with a gift or a donation of hard cash. The wassailers' demand for figgy pudding in the traditional carol, "We Wish You a Merry Christmas," is followed up by the menacing, "We won't go until we get some." Due to its pagan origins, wassailing faced resistance from the medieval clergy, who barred wassailers from church, and it was banned outright in English towns during the Puritan Christmas crackdowns of the 1600s and 1700s. Wassailing eventually returned during the Victorian Christmas revival. However, the carolers were now usually sober and often in family or choral groups, singing Christian-themed songs and what we now know as Christmas carols. In a similar, if slightly more creepy fashion, the Welsh custom of the Mari Lwyd also involved groups of people parading through towns, travelling door to door and singing. However, these processions were led by the Mari Lwyd, which translates to grey mare in English. The Mari Lwyd is constructed from a horse's skull, beautifully decorated with ribbons, colourful cloth and bells, mounted on a pole or stick. The person holding the Mari Lwyd would often conceal their body and face with a white sheet. In addition to singing traditional Welsh songs, the Mari Lwyd engaged the occupants of each house in an exchange of witty verses known as punco, which was said to bring good luck and blessings to the visited households. Eventually, the occupants would invite the Mari Lwyd and its group inside, where further merriment and celebrations took place. The Mari Lwyd is experiencing a revival in Wales, with communities working together to keep this custom alive and have fun while doing it. Most years, I reserve the solstice feast for the weekend, so that there is time to create a hygge-lig atmosphere inside my home, with lighted candles, arrangements of evergreens, bare branches and winter berries, and a crackling fire. Dinner involves just my close family and sometimes close friends, enjoying a special feast together, usually beef Wellington, with green peppercorn sauce, herb and garlic roasted fingerling potatoes, and a warm wintergreen salad. A sticky fig and ginger pudding with butterscotch sauce tops off the festive meal. The whole family joins in the traditional pudding stir-up. Each member takes a turn to stir the batter and makes a wish for the family. Then I pop a coin or an almond into the batter before baking it to bring good fortune to one lucky member. We will explore the traditions, history and folklore of Christmas and Yule foods next week. I hope you enjoyed today's episode on decking the halls, the symbolism behind decorating with evergreen plants, wassailing traditions, the evolution of caroling, and the Mari Lwyd. In next week's episode, we will dive into the delicious history of Christmas and Yule feasting, including Christmas dinner traditions, sweets, treats, and warm beverages. See you next week for Episode 6, Winter Feasting.